For many years, I had this irrational desire to fly American Airlines in first class. I knew it wouldn't be top tier, but American will soon be phasing out their Flagship First, and conveniently, it was on a route I needed to fly anyway. The American check-in at LAX was in Terminal 4. I found the priority sign and walked in to find a pretty dismal looking set of counters and some unnecessarily rude staff. Nevertheless, I checked in and dropped off my bags. As I had plenty of time, I went back outside and lo and behold, I found the special entrance for Flagship First passengers and a fantastic AA employee who escorted me right to the front of TSA. And I mean the front. We walked straight past half a dozen people already waiting in the priority line. My flight was leaving from the Tom Bradley terminal, but instead of heading straight over, I decided to check out the American Airlines Flagship Lounge. I was handed an invitation at the bottom of the stairs, which I handed back about 10 seconds later at the top of the stairs. As soon as I entered the lounge, I was offered a glass of champagne. I found a spot to sit close to the window, with great views looking across part of the Tom Bradley terminal. The lounge itself was a little bit busy, but there were still some empty seats here and there. I loved the tall ceiling and big windows, which made it feel light and open. Unfortunately, the Flagship First dining area is now closed, but there was a buffet section available. I had a few cookies, but nothing looked particularly interesting and I wanted to save space for the Qantas lounge. I saw my plane pulling in and figured it was time to make the walk across to Terminal B. In theory, I could have gone through TSA at Tom Bradley, but it's a much better option to do this at Terminal 4 than walk across airside. I went to my assigned gate to make sure it actually existed before heading to the Qantas First Lounge. The Qantas First Lounge is completely indoors, with no external windows or views of the ramp. It's basically one long rectangle split up into a sitting area and a dining area towards the back, with a bar running along the side. There was a proper menu and a good range of food available to order, including a plant-based option. Most importantly, I was finally able to try the famous salt and pepper squid, and it didn't disappoint. I followed up with the bass, which was also well prepared and definitely above average for lounge food. It felt more like being in a restaurant rather than an airline lounge. I finished with a couple of desserts. The chocolate cake was insanely rich and decadent. Full of food, I went back to the gate to make sure it still existed and to do some spotting. Tonight's flight was on a Boeing 777-300ER. This is the only aircraft type in the American Airlines fleet with a proper international first class. Unfortunately, American will soon be retrofitting these aircraft interiors and removing first class altogether. That's not necessarily a bad thing, as modern day business class products are getting better and better, but there's still something to be said for the old school charm of an old school first class seat. If there's one thing America knows how to do, it's how to separate people into boarding groups. We had about a dozen or so pre-boarding people, after which we were called forward to boarders group 1. I'd never flown American Airlines long haul, so I was keen to get on board and explore my seat and amenities. As you'd expect, first class was at the front of the plane, along with a small mini business class cabin just behind it. Both the first and business classes are laid out in a 1-2-1 configuration, but as you can see, the first class seats are a little bit larger and take up slightly more floor space. First class consisted of 8 seats with a fully open design. No suites or doors or anything here, just old school space and a supposed feeling of exclusivity on board. The seats were stocked with goodies. We'll get to the bedding a bit later, but there were multiple blankets, pillows, and a mattress pad on the seat and footrest. There was also a menu, a bottle of water, amenity kit, slippers, and B&O headphones. Given I had my own personal overhead storage bin, I had no problem putting away all the bits and pieces from my seat. I took this opportunity to get some shots of the cabin before it filled up, and the purser came around to introduce herself. The seat sits on a swiveling base and faces forward for takeoff and landing. After takeoff, you can angle it towards the TV so it's in line with the footrest. But you can also swivel it all the way around to directly face the windows and look out, as I'll demonstrate later on. As you would expect, legroom wasn't an issue, but it would have been nice if the seat was already angled towards the TV and footrest. I was offered a glass of champagne and a choice of sizing for my PJs. The design and colours were also a bit drab, but to be honest, I didn't mind it. In fact, I think I prefer it versus something chintzy and over the top. It had a certain 2000s feel to it. Each seat had a little winged back, but it really did nothing for privacy, and the sides were completely exposed. Having a closer look at the seat, directly ahead of me was a wall with a coat hook and IFE screen off to the side. The large side console is where most of the seat features were, starting with a literature pocket at the front. Moving along, there was a fold-out dining table, suite controls, and this strange spot with a USB port, which I assume was for phone storage or something. Further back, there was another fold-out table, and a detachable remote for what AA calls comfort controls. Finally, right at the back were my headphones, amenity kit, and this panel, which had the IFE remote and not just one, but 2 universal power points. The area was finished off with a cute little lamp for mood lighting and a mirror. In my opinion, these B&O headphones are some of the best as an airline offering. It's just a shame American doesn't let you use them for the whole flight, and I'm pretty sure these are also supplied in business, which is great for them, but it doesn't help to differentiate the first and business class products. As I mentioned before, you could detach the comfort control remote and play around with some seat settings and functions like massage and lumbar support. The menu had some Amex Centurion aesthetics to it, but the contents of the drinks list was more like a green card. The food menu looked good, and American lets you view the main course options and choose your preferred meal ahead of time online. That way you're guaranteed to get your first preference. From what I could tell, it wasn't an issue for me to choose something else if I changed my mind on the day. The crew seemed happy to offer me any of the meals I wanted. Eventually, we pushed back and I was invited to join a seat-to-seat chat, which ended up being a group chat with half a dozen people on board. After takeoff, the passenger next to me asked the crew how to release the TV to angle towards him, at which point the crew member looked very confused and said it wasn't possible. Don't worry, I showed him where the button was. American also offered in-flight Wi-Fi, but I'm not a Wi-Fi expert to know whether the pricing was reasonable. Instead, I checked out the normal IFE options, which had plenty of categories for movies, and I found something to watch. I was offered a hot towel, which wasn't particularly luxurious, but better than nothing. But the curtain may as well have been nothing. I was surprised at the use of such a sheer curtain between cabins, and it really detracted from the privacy and prestige that a first class cabin should have. Anyway, the crew came around to set my table and brought around some warm nuts, olives, and a drink. I was still quite full from the lounge, so didn't really need the nuts or olives. For the starter, I had poached Maine lobster with seasonal citrus and radish. It's not quite what I was expecting, and in fact it was downright strange. For a dish described as poached lobster, I didn't expect something that looked like a shredded seafood extender salad on a slice of cucumber, with grapefruit and orange slices to go with it. Thankfully, the pretzel roll was great. The butter was this bright white colour and firm crumbly texture, which made it difficult to differentiate from the feta in my salad, as I inevitably dropped some in there while trying to butter my roll. For my main, I'd pre-selected the beef short rib. The portion size was great, but it was lacking in presentation and the meat looked a bit dry. Just look at how sad those carrots and peas look. The inside was alright, but it could have used some more of the soy honey sauce. I doubled up on dessert again, because the sound of a gooey butter cake was too good to pass up, and I'd heard about the famous ice cream sundaes on American, so I had to try one of those as well. With dinner out of the way, it was time to sit back and finish my movie. This is what the seat looked like when it was partially reclined, and it was a very comfortable way to sit and relax. There was plenty of width, and the adjustable calf support helped with keeping my feet up. The little throw blanket was also cozy, and overall, it was comfy until I got too tired and wanted to sleep. This is what the seat looks like in bed mode, and I had to make my own bed with the supplied amenities. I quite liked the Casper branded bedding. The pillows were great, the blanket was soft and cozy, and the mattress pad really helped to make the seat feel plush. The seat lets you retract the armrests for easier access and wider space. Overall, the bed length and width was good, with no restrictions for foot or shoulder space. The only problem was the huge gaping hole at the side, which meant that there was absolutely no feeling of privacy or personal space when lying down. It's hard to convey on camera, but when I was lying down, it felt like I was in the aisle, and I could feel whenever someone walked past. However, clearly it had no real effect on my ability to sleep, because I slept for a solid 10 hours. I did plan on having a mid-flight snack, but the cabin temperature was good and the bed was too comfortable. By the time I woke up, we were only a couple of hours out from Sydney and the breakfast service was underway. I had the mushroom, leek and asparagus frittata along with some yogurt, fruits and pastry. The warm pastries were nice, but the main dish was very mushy and soggy. As you can see, there was no tablecloth and everything was served on the one tray. The crew must have been busy because my breakfast tray took a solid half an hour to be cleared from my seat. Earlier, I mentioned that the seat could be rotated to face the windows, much like in Singapore Airlines A380 suites. The difference on American is that the seat rotation is done manually, rather than the power-operated swiveling mechanism on Singapore or even Qantas's A380 seats. I went to stretch my legs a bit and to have a look at the business cabin. It's a solid business class seat, and although first and business are both in a 1-2-1 layout, you can clearly see that the business class seats are substantially less spacious than up in first. The sun started to come up about an hour before landing, at which point the crew came around to collect the headphones. Not a big deal because I wasn't watching anything at the time, but it's also not a very premium experience either. So what did I think of American's Flagship First Class? First of all, I was the only Aussie in first class on this flight, and the crew seemed to like me. Both the ladies working in the first cabin were super friendly and polite. The actual service may have been lacking a little, if we consider the lack of product knowledge like with my seatmate's TV screen, or the fact you had to make your own bed, or my breakfast took ages to clear, or that you can't even use your headphones for the entire flight. But the crew definitely didn't mean any harm and only had good intentions. That being said, in terms of world first class standards, it was mediocre to put it nicely. And that's pretty much the theme with everything with this flagship first product. If we go back to the start, my initial priority check-in experience was terrible. But thankfully, the team member at the flagship first desk was a legend, and I wish I saw that section the first time. It was a complete service recovery, and I left with one of the best check-in and security experiences I've ever had. Then there's the story of the two lounges. The American Flagship Lounge had awesome airport views, but since the Flagship First dining area was closed, the food paled in comparison to the Qantas Lounge. The Qantas Lounge didn't have any views at all, but it did have great food. Then we get on board. The seat was comfortable to sit and sleep, but it severely lacked any sense of privacy and could do with some more well thought out storage. However, I did like the old school sort of feel with the big, wide space and lots of personal room. It may be an old seat, but it's still the best seat on the plane, and one of only 2 direct first class options between Australia and America, for now at least. If I'm being completely honest, the food was bad. I've come to learn that catering out of LAX isn't necessarily the best, but this was an American flight leaving from an American base, and really it should have been better. As I said at the beginning of the video, I went into this knowing it wouldn't be top tier, but I really wanted to fly the American 777 First Class. Despite the shortcomings, it was still an extremely comfortable way to fly for 15 hours, and I thoroughly enjoyed the experience.